Hey guys, Sean Bougie, surplusfundsriches.net. Today, we're going to talk about skip tracing, get a little more in depth. I know in the past what I've done with skip tracing is I've basically told people, hey, stop getting these no-name, no-brand free skip tracing systems because they're useless and you get what you pay for. But let me go in a little more detail as to why that is, okay? Because people want to argue with me. And, my gut response, if I was a jerk, would be, yeah, how many deals have you put together? How many deals have you actually contacted the people using that information from the no-name, no-brand system or the free system? But I'm going to not do that today, okay? Guys, the good systems, the IDI data, the Accurant, all the guys out there that are well-known, LexisNexis, TLO, all those guys are using different variants of going after primarily credit headers, okay? Yeah, there's other ways to find information on people. There's social media trolling. There's a lot of different methods that certain companies can come up with finding individuals. Microbuild is particularly good at finding possible relatives and associates, but that's because they're actually doing something a little different with the credit headers, where they're looking to see if we've got a match on, for instance, address across different people on credit headers, and then they're going to say that's a possible relative or associate, which makes sense. Person obviously knew them if they were living in the property at the same period of time, right? Credit headers are what are used by credit card companies and mortgage companies and all that. When they do a credit check, the information is typically drawn off of credit headers. Those are identifiable data points, names, addresses, social security numbers, all that. That's what they're using for a reference, and as a result, they're a lot more accurate, okay? That's why it pays to use an IDI data, a TLO. We recommend IDI, Microbuild, and believe it or not, White Pages Premium. However, there are other systems out there that also use credit headers. Here's the other part of that. Skip tracing is it's an art, guys. Even if you have a good system, you have to have a reference. Now, if somebody owned the property, which is our claimants, typically that information is going to be, they call it dragged out of Register of Deeds, departments, courthouses, and that information is going to be good enough because you have an address of something they owned. That is going to be good enough to get a cross-reference where they go, aha, we have the right John Smith, okay? However, sometimes it is not, especially if it's an area, maybe it's a smaller metro statistical area, maybe it's a very small county where they're not dragging or checking changes to Register of Deeds Department as often. So as a result, the owner, if they owned that property but they weren't living there, for instance, right, or they own multiple properties, they may not show up as a hit on one of those systems. That's why, again, this is me pounding on the table. That's why, again, it is so important to have the deed. If you have the deed will oftentimes reference who the buyer is and a mailing address for them. And if they're not planning on staying in the property, when they have that deed created, they're going to give their notification address where they're actually living, which means now you got a better shot at getting a hit off the skip tracing. People have asked us that before, why do you have to have that deed? Because, we showed the transfer deed where we knew the person owned it. Well, there's a couple of issues. There's a couple of reasons beyond that. They might have been a partial owner, even though they got foreclosed on. And by having the other deed, we may know who actually owned it. By having the deed when they owned it, we may know if it's a joint tenants with rights of survivorship deed, which means that if one of them died, we can still go after the deal because it transferred to the other person if this happened prior to the foreclosure. So now we can go after just the one claimant and we don't have to worry about splitting it up and airship and all that crazy crap because we had the deed. The other place to check for addresses, there's two other places to check. Again, skip tracing is an art, right? Another place to check, besides the deed, is the tax assessor's office will oftentimes show the property address, and if there is a separate or different notification address, they will show that as well. That's another reason why Guess what? We ask you guys for a copy of that page, the tax assessor's office, the page with that information on it. That's why we don't make busy work for you guys, right? We're trying to make sure we pursue every possible angle on this thing to find the person. So that's another way to find it. Now, the final little tip I'm going to throw, there's 2 tips. One is, if you're sending out mailings and it comes back, be sure to check the bottom of that mailing, because if they had a forwarding order at one point and it expired, they will oftentimes, for a certain amount of time, say, hey, forwarding, it'll say right on the return, forwarding order expired, and then it'll actually give you the address that it was supposed to be forwarded to. So that's great. That's great information. So read that, right? Finally, if it was a joint tenants with rights of survivorship and somebody died, and it is one of those states, and this is rare, but it is one of those states where the death certificate is available to you, they will often have on the death certificate an informant. An informant is basically the person that said, yeah, I knew this guy, he was my buddy, he died. Or it's a really good friend of the family, I knew this guy, he died, yeah, that's his body, right? The informant. When they have informants, that's another great person to contact. Also, Microbilt's wonderful to use. And if you do use Microbilt, just give them a call, Microbilt, B-I-L-T, microbilt.com. Call them, talk to Randy Mosteller. Tell him Sean Bougie or Greater Good Company sent him. He'll waive the startup fee of $200. Now, a couple more items that you guys need to understand if you're going to use a real skip tracing system. Those guys are going to be really careful about making sure that they are compliant with FCRA. That's Fair Credit Reporting Act, especially if they give you regulated information. So they're going to require you to once a year take a test to make sure you understand what FCRA is. In other words, you understand how to handle this data, how to keep it safe. They're going to require that. Another thing is, and we've had this before, we have a lot of people that are researchers for us that send us information from outside of the country. They're researchers for us because they cannot get skip tracing systems because they're outside of the country and they don't have a U.S. address and they don't have a company, even if it's a DBA recorded, which a lot of people need to have in order to get a good skip tracing system in the United States. That's what you need to have. They're going to look for it can be a DBA. You can get that for $20 at the county, doing business as, also called an alias, or there's a number of different terminology for that. But bottom line is, if you're out of the country, you're going to need to have a U.S. address that can be checked. They can actually go in and check and make sure it's a secure area where there's a locking door, that type of thing, and a U.S. bank account under a company name if you're doing it on your own. That's why a lot of people are researchers with us. Let it be our problem. We're completely vetted for that. We have no issue with it. We have multiple systems. But skip tracing is an art. It is an art form, and you've got to know how to do it. And finally, on FCRA, Fair Credit Reporting Act, one of the things is if you're pulling regulated data, and you don't need regulated data. We're talking about Social Security numbers. If you're pulling that, though, make daggone sure you are having that destroyed when you throw the file out. I'd keep it for at least a couple of years. If you put a deal together, I keep them for 7. Okay, just statutes of fraud. I want to be on the good side of the law. Everybody wants to be on the good side of the law. I'll keep it for 7 years before I actually destroy that file if I put a deal together. If I didn't put a deal together, I'm going to destroy that file right away. I'm just going to get rid of it. But I'm going to, if I used regulated data, I am going to make sure that I destroy it with a crosscut shredder or have a company come and get it. Most of the stuff that I pull is not regulated data, even though it's from a skip tracing system that will provide that. And as a result, I don't have to do that. But I do err on the side of caution in whatever I do. You guys need to know this stuff. You need to understand how skip tracing works. You need to understand it as an art form. And if you have any questions at all about our system, pre-purchase. If you're considering coming on board with us, go ahead. First go to surplusfundsriches.net, click on products, scroll down to the bottom of the page. There's an overview of all of our programs called the Insider's Guide. Once you've read that, if you want to call me, I'm available 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time with pre-purchase, not post-purchase. That's handled through Jeff. Pre-purchase questions, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, 704-791-9398. Thanks, guys.